everybody, I'm here to talk about some big news in astrology, a big headline, and that is Neptune moving into the sign of Aries on March 30th of 2025. So I've talked before, I did a video before about Pluto going into the sign of Aquarius and what that all means for us collectively. And Neptune, is the next slowest moving planet. So when he changes signs, it's also a really big deal. So Pluto, it takes about 248 years to go all the way around the zodiac. Depending what sign it's in, it can spend anywhere from 12 to 20 years or so in a sign because it is an elliptical rather than a circular orbit. But Pluto changed into the sign of Aquarius earlier this year for good. He went back and forth a little bit in 2023 and 2024, but he's in Aquarius for good, and he's going to be there for 20 years till 2044. So, that was a big deal, Pluto going into Aquarius. Well, now we have another outer planet changing signs, and Neptune only changes signs about every 14 years. So Neptune has been in the sign of Pisces since about 2011, 2012. Like, he had a little bit of back and forth with retrogrades in 2011, where he moved in initially into the sign of Pisces, and then he retrograded back into Aquarius, and then 2012 he moved in for good. So 14 years in the sign of Pisces. And just as a heads up, the other outer planet, Uranus, is going to be changing signs also this year in July from Taurus to Gemini. So this really is a year where there is so much collective energy that is shifting and changing. And you really don't have to know anything about astrology. You just have to watch the news to know that things are really topsy-turvy and changing like crazy right now. And, especially having three outer planets change in the span of about a year is it's a lot of change going on, because the outer planets tend to affect us more as a collective on a global level. And so we see a lot of the changes and the aspects, they tend to appear more in the news. However, depending on where they are in your chart, you may feel this more than others. And because they are slow moving planets, these are not aspects that are like a day long. They're things that last for a long time. And so they have impact on our lives on a sometimes more in the background, like on the world stage, but also, can impact our lives too on more deeper, more profound type levels. So Neptune. So I have here from the Astrochords Oracle, I have Neptune here, which has the keyword vision, and then Aries here with the keyword act. Neptune is, it's a planet that's about our collective dreams. It's a planet that's about the subconscious and the collective conscious. It's a planet that says, what's our vision? What are we working towards? What are our ideals? Neptune, is a planet that, is all about the collective dream. It's about the sense of oneness with each other. It's our sense of spirituality, but it can also have a darker side to it. It can be about fantasy, and sometimes fantasy is good, as in imagination and creativity. That's definitely the good side, but sometimes it's like the rose-colored glasses or the illusions. It can be the delusions and the misinformation. It can be, the fantasy as opposed to the reality, right? So, Neptune, can be like a double-sided thing. And when Neptune goes into a sign, usually at the beginning of that sign, it's all about the ideals. We have this ideal that we're working towards. We often are very optimistic about things. And then by the time we get to the end of that Neptune period, sometimes what happens is that the illusion pops. Like, there's this illusion that, we had at the beginning that we don't have anymore, or we see the dark side of it, or people have taken things to an extreme or perverted things in some way. And so it's all about like having that vision, but trying to make sure that we keep it in the more positive and more realistic area so that we don't wander off into the kind of more extreme area of things. So Neptune has been in Pisces, since 2011, 2012. And that's really been, the explosion of social media, the idea that we could all be connected to each other, very Piscean, right? Pisces is all about like having that emotional connection to each other. It's all about spiritual connection and oneness. It's also like about, making sure that we're, empathetic towards others, which is great. I know there's a move right now to say empathy's bad, which is like, what? But anyway. um, empathy and kindness and caring for people. And that's really where you also got this is very much the era of wokeness, right? However, I know it's got negative and positive connotations depending who you are, right? But it's this idea of like, okay, we got to address collective wrongs and, trying to not just make things equal, but trying to, get equity for things. It really have this idealistic, sort of idea of like, we can make things, more one and fair and things, which is like this Piscean dream, right? And it started off like that for sure, I think. And you had at the beginning of this era, things like the Arab Spring going on in the world. There was like definitely a lot of hope for change in the Middle East. You also had, the protests against Wall Street, against the 1%. There was this idea of like, Piscean ideal of like equality and oneness and things, which was really great. But as kind of time went on, we saw some of the darker sides of Neptune and Pisces emerge in things like misinformation and disinformation campaigns going on in social media, where they were using sort of this, very collective kind of way for people to connect with each other, to sow mistrust, to sow division between people, to put, misinformation out there so nobody knew what the truth was anymore. And that's very Neptunian, right? This idea of fogginess and illusions that came up in this era. We also had people take some things to extreme. Instead of looking at the ideals of like equality and trying to make things more fair for people, we had people sort of like, policing people and cancel culture and, acting, became this very puritanical, like you got to say all the right words and, agree with every single thing, you'll be cast out, like sort of this very, came to another extreme, especially towards the end of it. So you can see how things kind of, in any era of Pisces, or pardon me, any era of Neptune, you have the ideals and like the good intentions, but you can also have people who manipulate those intentions or spread misinformation in some ways. Before that, we were in the era of Neptune in Aquarius, and that was from about 1998 or so to that 2011, 2012. And you think about like, this was like the era of like Y2K, and, it was the end of the millennia and the beginning of a new one. And Aquarius is about technology, and it was like, technology is going to make everything great, and computers are going to fix everything, and it's going to be amazing, and there'll be space travel. Like, it was very much the ideals around technology. But then there was also like, we saw how technology could start to become maybe not such a good thing. We had like the .com crash, and then later on we had the banking crash and all that kind of stuff. So there was this dream of like technology and this dream of progress. There was also, Aquarius is a very humanitarian sign. So there was also, hey, we're going to have this, the old order's gone, the Soviet Union and all that have fallen. We can build a new order and a new community. Except again, towards the end of that era, we saw that it just meant that the power was shifting towards like the rich, right? So you have some of those things going on. And before that, we had the Neptune and Capricorn era, which is about 1984 to 1998 or so. And Capricorn's all about authority, big business, big money, big government. It's also achievement oriented, building things up. And so this was, an era where the collective dream was about success through monetary means. This was like idealizing like, the banker, and idealizing, earning lots of money and big business and all of those kind of things. So you can see how it's like, it's about the collective dream. So we look for clues to the future in the past, right? Like, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And so the last time that Neptune was in the sign of Aries was in the 1860s. So Neptune moved into Aries in 1861. And of course, the 1860s, in the United States anyway, was the era of the Civil War. Actually, the Civil War started right around the time that Neptune moved into Aries in 1861. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be civil war, but, it's very worrying. Like, let's not deny it, looking at what's going on in the news. And I have to say, as somebody living in Canada, I'm very worried about what's happening and all these threats of trying to annex us and stuff. There's a lot of fears around these things. And it's not great, right? And so this is a very troubling time. And so, we have this Neptune in Aries. I think it's already starting to shift into that kind of energy. Just so you know, Neptune is going to go into Aries on March 30th. It'll be in Aries till October 22nd, and then he's going to retrograde back into Pisces briefly, and he'll until January 26, 2026, when he'll move permanently into Aries until, I think it's for 14 years, so it's going to be until the 2040, I think it is. So this is really a preview over the next few months of some of the themes we're going to have going on for the next 14 years. So watch kind of what's going on in the world. Now, Neptune's the collective dream, right? And so if we look back at sort of some of the things that happened in the 1860s and early 1870s, of course, we have the Civil War. Aries is a sign that's associated with the warrior. And so there was this idealism around like soldiers and glorifying war. There's this idealism also around expansionism and pioneering. This is also the time of expansion into the West in the United States. This is where we got the idea of like the cowboy and the pioneer and things, right? And so this idea of like going out into the wilderness or going out into this new world and like, you know, conquering things and doing new things and sort of this myth of this person doing it all by themselves. I mean, nobody did, right? But that's the dream, that's the myth, right? And so there's this myth of like the individual being able to be the hero and go out into the world. And, you know, and there is something to be said as an to sort of offset the previous sign that Neptune was in. Like under Neptune, there was sort of like Pisces or Neptune and Pisces. Some people idealized being a victim, idealized this idea that, oh, you don't have any personal agency. And I think both things are true. There's obviously, systemic things that affect people. And if you are, if you're not born into a space of like, where you have money or you have a lot of power, you're going to be behind people who do. I think that's a reality. And it's a reality that people make their own choices. Like, I think both these things are true. It's just both of these dreams kind of take it to an extreme, right? Where it's like, both these things are true at the same time. And I think what we might see is this shift over to this sort of other extreme of this idea of like, you should be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps all by yourself. And, anybody can make these choices, and sort of moving into, kind of denying that there are things that, might put people behind or make it more difficult for them to make those changes, because it's going to idealize the individual and the hero. I think it's also idealizing the masculine. And like, let's face it, I mean, masculine and feminine are pretty arbitrary categories anyway, but take it to any extreme, things are bad, right? And there's nothing wrong with like either masculine or feminine, and we're all both those things in some degree, so whatever. But there's this idealism of like, we see this in sort of this rise of like the manosphere and like bro culture and things like that, where it goes into kind of the more toxic or more extreme level of things. That's not great. And so we're starting to see some of those things. Aries is also associated, like again, with pioneering, with doing new things. This was an era where in the 1860s, we saw trains increasing. So there was like, transportation was definitely increasing. I think it's also like Pony Express started as well. So there's this idea of like going out into places that we haven't gone before. Because it's Neptune in Aries, and Neptune is the ocean. This was also when we started to see iron battleships become a thing that wasn't before. So I'm wondering if naval warfare or more an increase of like policing of the seas is going to become more of a thing. Some people also speculated it might be warming, because Aries is a fire sign of the oceans. None of these things sound particularly positive, right? Like, I'm like, ooh, that's a little worrying, right? But I wonder too if there might be more attention towards the ocean as well, which might be a good thing. Like, we do have to think about those things, right? So 1860s also, as a Canadian, I have to say 1867 is when Canadian Confederation happened, and Canada, was we have the borders we have now, and we were, became independent from Britain. So, very important for like Canada becoming a modern country. And of course, we have this Neptune return, and we now have like threats from the American government on our sovereignty. And what's happened is Canadians have really responded with like, a sense of solidarity. People are boycotting American goods. They're not going to the States. I mean, there was that terrible story where, and there's been a few of them, where there was like a Canadian who was detained for like 12 days in like an ICE prison, because she filled out her visa wrong. Just things like that, tourists being, put into these private prisons and things, which they make money from imprisoning people. Like, it's not, people feel like it's not safe to go anywhere. I know a fair amount of people who had plans to go to the States this year and canceled them. They canceled them because they're like, it's not safe. We can't go there anymore, right? We don't know what's going to happen to us. So, it's very troubling. I'm hoping that, because if I look at the chart for Canadian Confederation, we have the rising sign of Aries, and so Neptune is in our first house, and so we have this Neptune return, and it's really about like, people are like, really kind of rallying around like that Canadian identity and stuff, and what it means to be Canadian. So I'm hoping that, obviously that we come through okay, all of this. Who knows what's going to happen? But I also, I hope for people in the States that things get better too. I hope that, that things get better for them too. I definitely hope that there isn't another civil war. That would be absolutely terrible. The other thing too is like that, things may not look exactly the same as before. It may not be an outward sort of war, but there definitely is a culture clash that's going on in the West. And so there's, sort of two extremes that, there's one side that's extremely extreme. But with all the MEG and everything, and totally trying to dismantle and destroy the American government, which is interesting because we also have Saturn and Neptune. They're not going to go exactly conjunct this year, but they are getting very close, and then they're kind of going to go apart again, and then they're going to go exactly conjunct in 2026. And often when Saturn and Neptune are conjunct, there's something we thought was solid, i.e. Saturn, dissolves, i.e. Neptune. Something we just took for granted was always going to be there falls apart. And last time that we had a Saturn conjunct Neptune, I was in another sign, but this was the fall of like the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so something we thought was always going to be there, or at least was there the whole time for my life, it happened when I was a teenager, was, like the Soviet Union and, the like Eastern Europe, the Eastern Bloc, and all of a sudden that was gone. It just and there wasn't like some big dramatic, one, fight or anything. It just sort of disappeared. It just dissolved. And so we may see those things come up as well, where things that we took for granted or we thought were solid and always going to be there, dissolve at this time. So I don't say these things to scare people. I'm just saying that these are the energies that are going on. And how do we work with that, right? Like, how do we work with that energy? Because we can't, it's a big collective thing. We're not going to change that, right? But I think that we can take the positive little attributes of Neptune and Aries. Things like, the idea of like being our own hero, the idea of like personal responsibility, like in a good way. It's always a balance, right? But like personal responsibility for ourselves and our actions, and also integrity and courage, having the integrity and the honesty to speak up when we see something, speak our truth, tell our stories, act with courage, think about what our values are and act with integrity. I think those are things that are really good that we can really stand on. Neptune and Aries too, last period, just as like a side note, I was listening to this podcast that we were talking about, I didn't know this, but there were a lot of sports that we play now that were invented around this time, like baseball, I think was one of them, football, and I think basketball, that were invented at this time. I think also, was it golf? There's like a bunch of sports apparently that became a thing during this time. So we might see some new sports being developed. There might be more of an emphasis on athleticism and things like that. But it'll be interesting to see like what kind of sports and things like come up during this time. So the collective dream is shifting, and I think we're already seeing some of that going on. Now, some of the things I see going on are definitely like so scary, like all the stuff. Like I have to limit what I'm reading about some of the horror stories of what's going on in the States right now to people. It's just terrible. Like, I'm really, really worried for people. I'm worried for us too here in Canada being threatened and stuff. But I'm hoping that, that we all pull through this, that we get to the other side, that we can stand up against this. And you always see people, people are standing up. Like, there's protests going on. There's people taking action against, like Tesla and some of these other, companies. And then you also see people people boycotting like American goods, or people, even the States boycotting the billionaires and the big companies and things like that. So be interesting to see what happens, but definitely dynamics are shifting. They're shifting in a big way. But let me know what your thoughts are about Neptune going into the sign of Aries. Are you worried about things? Do you think there could be like positive aspects to this? What are your thoughts about things? But I'm sending you wherever you are in the world. I'm hoping all good people need to stick together, right? We'll all pull through. Let's pray for peace for everybody and security and freedom for everyone. I have this, maybe it's pie in the sky, but I want to live in a world where everybody's equal opportunities, everybody's valued, no matter if you're male or female or gay or straight or whatever your ethnicity is, and that we all have like clean air and clean water and housing and food and education and healthcare and opportunities. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? I believe that that's the dream that we should be working towards. So that's my thoughts, Neptune and Pisces. Let me know what your thoughts are. If you like these kind of videos, I do weekly astrology videos on my Patreon, along with tarot scopes, so you can know what's coming up for the week for you, for your sign. So I do that. You can also get astrology readings from me on my Etsy shop. And then also, I do have a free newsletter on my website that you can sign up for. I have like a monthly newsletter where I talk about the headlines that are going on for the month in astrology. And I have a blog as well, so you can check that all out on my website. Thank you so much for being here. You guys are great. Thank you for all of your support. Sending you love wherever you are in the world. And as always, peace and love and love.